Hey, Kiev, good morning. Alena is the best. So you basically gave me a speech already and explained everything. So we're going to be talking today about the pains of scaling a product org. So let me address a couple elephants in the room. So CTO, why? It happens. So when the two founders come together and one founder focusing on the sales and marketing and another one focusing on the product and tech. So that's what happened in our case. And I was managing engineering and product org from the very, very beginning till now. That's why. And to move on, let me ask you a question like, who of you thinks that all the processes and the structure works brilliantly and it's flawless and you don't want to change anything in your company? I got my target audience. Fantastic. So let's meet. So who knows PandaDoc? Okay, that's great. So at PandaDoc, we built a software for sales team to organize the process around the sales documents. And basically what it does, it helps you to close more deals. If you sell and it's optimized and you can close those deals faster, you basically generate more revenue. So Yaroslav said we got 13,000 companies, we got 15 already, so we're growing. 15,000 companies globally. About $3.5 billion closed on the platform means signed documents. So the companies won $3.5 billion. When we got these statistics, we were surprised, in a positive way. And every 7 seconds, our customers send documents. More likely, someone already sent a document while I was talking. And we have 4 offices. Means that's where we started the company, and then San Francisco, when the headquarters is, and St. Pete, Florida, and also Manila, Philippines. About me, a couple things. So I mostly focus on the product strategy right now. I went from 0 to 250 people at the company right now, 90 people in product and engineering. Yaroslav said about the funding, and also I moved from Minsk to San Francisco, where I lived a couple years, and then I moved to St. Pete to open an office where I lived a couple years already. So, organization design, why, right? And I was thinking about this, and I realized that you can build a great product if you build a great organization. Because, so the product are built by people, and my job as an executive, and my job as a founder, and my job as a product leader is to build the organization which can deliver on the promise to our customers and deliver this in the right way to address the market needs, the customer's needs, etc., etc., etc. And at some point, you move from the designing a product from the very beginning. So when you talk to customers, so when you understand all the problematics and everything, to designing a product organization. And I personally, being a product manager for the organization, I'm talking to people, to my customers, understand what are the challenges at the organization, and designing and changing the organization to address all the needs. That's what I do. And that's what the executives and the product leaders do as well. I saw many ways how to build a product organization and what to focus on. So there are 3 main things, which is the functional areas. So when you build a product, and usually organization mimics the product you build. So you adapt the organization to deliver what you want. And in our case, it's a functional area, so we build the product org around the functional areas. But I saw organizations who build their orgs around the personas, so they're serving specific personas and they're addressing their needs. And some organizations, they build around metrics. So and they optimize around the specific metric to focus on a metric. And everything, all of this, they present in the org, but the way how you structure your org, it depends the path you choose. In our case, this is functional areas, I mentioned this. And the reason why, because we have this platform, and so what PandaDoc does, so we serve each of the steps in the sales process to handle documents in each of them. So when the salespeople send like a brochure or presentation, so we have this stage in the process, and then when they move on to the proposal, when they send some pricing to the customers, so we also help them with the optimization of this process. And when they're ready to close and they send a document for a signature or a contract, which should be negotiated between the customers and the salespeople in the company, and to the final point when they get a signature and get a payment. So we decided to organize the org around those specific areas to deliver the value in each of them and to close this gap and to build this platform which connects things together. When I was analyzing like how we were growing, and there were many pains we'll talk about, I found an interesting article in the Harvard Business Review dated 1972 by one guy, Larry Greiner. I'm not sure if he's well known or not, but and he defined the growth of the org as basically as cycles and the combination of the evolution and revolution. You probably tell me more about the evolution and revolution in Ukraine, like you have a lot of experience. But so it's basically a combination of the evolution and revolution. And he defined 5 stages and phases of the growth. And so what he did is he defined when this crisis arises and what is the crisis and why you're moving to this next stage. And he was doing this not from the perspective of the product organization, but for any organization. And so when I read this article, I realized that, oh man, that's what happened in our case. And today, I'll share a couple of stories from PandaDoc, what happened to us on this path. And you'll get in my brain a little bit how I was thinking about the change in these things. And we'll go through the 0 to 100 people in the product and engineering. So we started with the phase 1, creativity. So what is creativity? When you have an idea and you have a couple people you work with, a couple founders, like a couple of people you know, and you start like working on the idea and trying to find this product market fit, trying to figure out if it's like needed at all, right? And nobody cares about processes there. So what is important there is, and what's typical in this stage is you are very, very hands-on and kind of working on the product and you're working on the problematics, like you were talking to customers, you're doing everything. And it reflects in the people you hire to the org. So usually it's an entrepreneurial talent. So it's like people who can do like everything, right? Yeah, you can do this and this and a website and maybe HTML coding a little bit, and then have a call with the customers. And it's perfect. At this stage, it makes total sense. And all the information flows, they're very informal because everyone understands everything. You don't need to share, like, you don't need to have meetings, you don't need anything. Like, everyone understands. It's a family type of a company. In our case, everything was great, up to 25 people. And then, so what happened is, when you have like 25 people, those like entrepreneurial talent people, all this communication and the creative activities, they become a problem because so like everyone is doing everything. Well, they have like the areas of the responsibility, but it's kind of, it is hard when you get up to 25 people. And the next thing you hear from your team is, our processes suck. I'm sure like it's a repeatable process, right? Oh, we don't have any processes, like everything is breaking, like we need to introduce some processes. And so we realized this when we analyzed like what does not work, that this like creative chaos, like it's actually hurting us more than helping. When it was in the very beginning. There's like no specialization, so the people we hired was like T-shaped. So they were specialized in a specific area, but they were like not like a deep knowledge in each of the areas. And when you start scale and when you start like changing this org, people usually tell you, oh man, like it was much better before. I remember those like good old days when we had a table and so we had those, I don't know, like lunches together and everyone knew everything. Time flies. And for us, the crisis of the leadership arose. And the crisis of the leadership when you are like, have your hands there all the time, and now you need to move out those hands, right? Not easy for me personally, and for everyone who is doing this. It's a mental shift. And for the people as well, because they lose this like a leader who was telling and doing everything. And we move to the next phase, which is the direction. So a direction phase happened when we got this 25 people sitting there, and we're like, okay, we need to do something. We need to do something, like it's very hard to scale. I can probably hire a couple more, gonna be hard. So what I did is I broke this down into like areas and streams. So, and the areas and streams in our case were like a document editing experience, integration, some core web app. Why? Because I understood that so there are like flows of the tasks and ideas in each of those areas, and I needed to somehow manage this better. I hired like effective managers. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to assign owners for each of the streams so I can talk to them and like figure out like what's going on there. But and I wanted to have like a more control over this because it was like 25 org and everyone is doing like everything. And at the same time, I was still like very, very hands-on with the product. And like I was talking to customers. I moved to US at that time. And so I was talking to customers, and they were kind of like on the delivery side, like trying to figure out like what's going on. And overall, this like management was still centralized and was like the bottleneck in my face because I was funneling all those product ideas to the managers. And the managers, they were like not super product oriented at that time. So they understood, they organized the work, but they were not like driving this. I was driving this. And so what usually happens after this is like, so you hear from the managers like, why are we doing this? Like, I just don't understand. So you're telling me what to do, and I'm doing this. And for them, it's also kind of demotion, right? So demotivation, because so they want to understand why and like what's the point. And from the development and from the teams, like you hear, like, we don't need managers. Like, everything is fine. Everything was great. Like, we don't need managers. Or maybe this type of managers, I don't know. And I realized that we have a problem. It's going to be talk about problems. I realized that we have a problem, so the centralization and me being a funnel to all the product ideas just doesn't work and does not scale. The whole like centralization thing like held us back at that time because it was hard to scale, right? I failed with hiring the right type of leaders who can just take over this later, figure out this, and drive this. Didn't do this and didn't work out. And it was growing, and I couldn't keep up. So at the point when those areas like started growing even more, we started adding more people in each of the area. I realized that it is hard, it doesn't work, and the crisis of autonomy arose. When the people want to be autonomous and they drive, and you're trying to direct them like all the time. We move to the next phase. See, we're still going to the phases according to the plan. So back in the day, it was probably around 35 people in the product. And we had those streams and the areas. And the managers were managing them. I decided to do a reorg. And the reason why, because I didn't have an owners, so they were just like executing. And I wanted to introduce this like a product mindset. So we have product managers working on specific areas, and they can drive those areas. So what I did is basically exploded the whole thing into smaller feature teams. I hired product managers and assigned those product managers to those teams. And those areas were functional areas. I'm talking about functional areas. It still was like an integration team, the bigger one, but also we broke this down into smaller teams that they could focus on a specific like specific features, I would say. So we hired PMs, and we also formally introduced like a product leader and engineering leader. And so we got like a different roles at the company. So we introduced multiple different roles at the company. So director of engineering, director of product, so they were managing engineering and product. Also product managers, like more or less true product managers now, they were like figuring out the product. We also introduced those teams, which were autonomous teams, so they can deliver value. We got inspired by Spotify. I'm sure you all know this stuff, like guilds and like all these things, to somehow align the functional areas in those teams, like backend, front-end, and being able to share this knowledge between the teams. And also, we built the reporting around the guild for the engineering and also for the product. And we realized at that time, so we need to move out the platform and infrastructure because it's like very different, and so we need to have this as a separate team. In our case, the teams, they were autonomous and cross-functional, so they could deliver the value on their own. So the product managers were figuring out stuff, developers were building, QA was testing, and was a designer assigned to a team they worked with to deliver what they need. So they don't need like any external resources and dependencies. Everything was good, everything was working, but 6 months later, you have this but always. Everything is good, but on a company level, we realized that so we have those walls between the product and sales and marketing. And the reason why, because we're like isolated. The product and engineering is in Belarus. Sales and marketing was in San Francisco. 10, 11 hours time difference does not help, right? And so we realized we need to change this, but change this on the company level, not just in the product. So we can change this on the product like as many times as we want, but it's not going to help. And that's when we introduce OKR on the OKRs on the company level. That's usually, yeah, I see some reaction. Familiar, right? So we introduced those OKRs on the company level, but it was like a mandatory thing on a company level aligned with the executive. So it wasn't like, okay, we're doing this in product and no one is doing this in sales. And the whole idea was the alignment and breaking those walls between the product, sales, marketing departments to understand where the company is going and how we're driving the company toward the goal. Because there were like different goals. They were building something in the product and says like, what the heck? Like, why did you build this? Like, we don't need this. But we see that users are using this. And it was like just crazy. So, and if you're not familiar with the OKR, so this is kind of an example, like a real example. So if you have an objective, for example, on a company level to improve UX or customer experience, and then you just think like from the product perspective, like how you can do this, and you build those OKRs in a specific department, how you can contribute to the higher level OKR, and then each team thinks like how they can contribute and have these key results, how to drive this objective. So what it brought to the organization, so it brought a very standard planning and execution cycle. So we started moving quarter by quarter. We kind of moved, but not in a product. So we started moving quarter by quarter. So it was like a good cadence and a good like a planning cycle for the company. So it helped a lot. And in the product, we also introduced our own cycle and our own kind of mechanics, how we work within a quarter and how we prepare all these things. So we got a couple rituals at the company, like a launch day when we pitched all the ideas, what we're going to be working on. PMs were like doing a presentation, like just to get this excitement from the team. We also introduced a couple points in the quarter, how we check those OKRs and the progress around the OKRs internally. And also every month we had a big meeting with all the developers, like all the teams presenting like what is the progress and how we're doing. And we had the launch day when we actually presented the results of the quarter. So that's how it looks like, not the best picture, but the launch day was like this pitch thing, and the recap day when we gathered together all the teams, and we usually had, we introduced like a very interesting structure to the presentation. So when you pitched like what you did with the OKRs, red, green, yellow, And also 3 more things. What worked well, where we failed, and also lessons learned. And also we started pick MVPs from the teams and celebrate this. And also we usually had the best parties ever after this. Does not scale anymore, but it was a great days. That's my life. 6 months, everything was working great. Like everyone is like just 6 months later, everything good, but we started growing. So we started growing, we started adding those like smaller teams. So we started hiring more PMs. A lot of things is happening. And so what I realized that, so we have some problems there. And so first of all, the complex reporting. So we introduced those guilds in the engineering. Engineers like didn't understand like where they report, like do they report to director of engineering, do they report to a guild lead? Guild lead is not the manager. It was a mess. Directors were overloaded because all those PMs, they reported to director. You're just one person, and it's crazy. This flat structure was like quite hard to scale because if you start hire like PMs next to each other, they have like a different levels, knowledge and ambitions, and you need to put somehow, and you need to like show this like career path to the new hire, like what's next, and there is nothing like at the top, right? But 2 main things, which was the driver for the change. I noticed that the small teams, they tend to take like smaller tasks and the smaller projects. And we stopped like getting ambitious goals and ambitious projects because we're not going to be finished in this quarter. I'll just skip. I'll take this one, right? And in order to take like a bigger task, a bigger goal, you needed to align a lot. So you needed to build like a coalition of the teams, like working on something. It was hard. And second thing is, remember those OKRs? Each team, they had their own OKRs. So the more teams, the more like objectives and everything. And alignment of the structure like became a problem for me personally because technically they reported to me through the director. Just was quite complicated. So another assumption we did back in the days that we treated those PMs as like mini CIOs. I'm sure you heard this. Oh, you're going to be CIO of this like area, right? And the CIO means like they're doing everything. So they're doing everything, so they're jack of all trades, so they're doing product, they're doing delivery, they're doing people. And as you understand, if you're doing everything, you're pretty much not doing anything, right? And second, that some people, they have like a different capabilities. Some of them, they're great product managers. They suck at people management. They just don't talk to people, right? And vice versa. Like some of them, they're delivery, but they just don't care about the customer. So what they need is like deliver a feature. Does not work. Didn't work for us. So we realized that, we need to change this. And so the crisis of control arose. So when you cannot control this like the flat structure, and so you're trying to understand like what's going on, and that was my all-day job, basically. So we moved to the next one, coordination. And in our case, we had those feature teams focusing on the areas. So we're growing this, and everything was good up to the certain point. So what I did is I pulled them together in the units. And the idea was I wanted to have more control like over this thing without like overloading myself. And I also built this ladder for the employees to grow to. And the idea of the units, so we're focusing on the areas, bigger areas. So we pull those teams together, they blend together, and we introduce 2 main roles in the structure, product leader and the unit leader. And the product leader, it was the true product manager at this time. So their job and responsibilities was around the product strategy for the specific area, how it contributes to the overall company vision, and also they were responsible for the go-to-market, for the launches, for the validation, for the customer development, and they stayed on top of metrics for the specific area and the specific features they were working on. And it worked great, because we also wanted to change the company dynamics and become customer-centric company and start talking to customers, like start to understand them, and they didn't have time before, right? So we introduced this structure, and that's how we define the main areas of the responsibility for the product leader. And for the unit leader, that equals engineering managers. They were responsible for managing developers, people management, delivery, and overall engineering processes, architecture, and working with a product leader to make sure that what we deliver is feasible, makes sense, and we can scale later, and help to achieve what we came up with in the product. So those OKRs, they transformed from the team's OKRs, which we had like tons of them, right, to more bigger chunks of the unit OKRs. And the units were managing everything like inside, but they were like translating back to the higher level of the organization, what they're doing, so what they are working on, like why, what's the metrics. And at this point, we started having like more clear direction in each of the areas, because product leaders started working on the strategy documents for the specific area, so we started understanding like why we need to invest there. So we introduced a couple initiatives, how to pitch a strategic initiative, how to build like a document, and how to pitch a strategic initiative so the company can invest in this direction and allocate resources to build something there. So they got more time, and they started doing more product work. As for the units, why we did this, so first of all, I wanted to combine all those smaller teams together so they have like a better like overlap and they can learn from each other. So, and we got this flexibility in the units so we can reallocate and rearrange the teams each quarter based on the initiatives and based on the missions, even within a quarter, because they're all still sitting in one unit, and they can rearrange, but they all report into the same engineering manager, so they're not constantly changing this. And was very important. So the reporting structure became easier because it's like less reports, and they handle everything, and was less communication points to me, which was good. 11 months later, everything was great. Everything was great in the very beginning because we started working on a fairly big areas, and it was like a lot of work in each of the areas. And so, but it helped in the very beginning, but then they realized that, so there are like two fundamental problems with this approach. So the first is the resources are allocated in a specific area, not the product need. And it's very hard to move a product-wide metric if we're talking about the NPS, which basically touches like every single area. The PMs and product leaders, they start thinking about here's like my area. So the resources were there, and the dynamics became, okay, we fixed all this stuff, but let's think about like what we're doing in this area. Not because the company needs it, right? But because it's my area. And so those like isolation and walls between the units became a problem. Because what I started seeing is the people started sharing resources between each of them. And by resources, I mean teams or focus or some research, et cetera, et cetera. So they started like helping each other. And the more they help each other, the more it kind of became, oh, there are many dependencies. And from the product perspective, they all thought about, oh, okay, so this is my area. I don't know, I won't give you an example because they might be listening. This is my area, right? And this is my funnel. And we got such a good metrics, like, so we get like very data-driven, like everyone understood like what's going on, but it was isolated. So do we see any overarching the mechanics or dynamics why this is happening? And good example. So the product leader was responsible to driving an adoption for the area or feature. So how to drive adoption? explain customers better, like do some Panda pop-ups and onboarding. And so what we ended up is like onboarding on top of onboarding on top of onboarding, because this PM launch, this PM launch, this PM launch, and it's like for the customers, like, right? And this is a company-wide initiative because this is a customer experience. But since it's isolated, like it's hard to connect together. So what didn't work for us in this specific case, as I explained, those resources were like separated in those areas, and focusing on something like in the unit does not mean that you're focused on something like very important for the company. And this reallocation became a problem because, oh, this is my resources, I'm growing this, I don't know, like my developers are great, I'm growing like the potential, so they have like a career ladders, like you build like social connections. And I apologize for resources, but by resources I don't mean like people, I mean like efforts you can put like into something. And so it was like hard to work on a company-wide initiative, as I mentioned, like NPS. So we couldn't move NPS because they were like everything. Like, so you needed to think like holistically from the high level how to change this. But what I noticed, like at the very end, that it's like super hard to launch new initiative because everyone knows what they're doing. So I'm doing this, like this is a red tape, this is a red tape, like so everyone is busy. Everyone knows what to do, which is great, but to change something, like it became like very hard to change something. And the red tape crisis arose. So when you have like red tape everywhere, like don't go there, I'm here, and it was hard. So we moved to the last phase, the collaboration. So we got those units, so they were focusing on specific areas, functional areas, big enough, so we're driving metrics. And I realized that in order to have an organization which can adapt to the company goals, so you need to build the org around the value, not around the functional area. Because always, if you build around the functional areas, they will be optimized in this area. And maybe it makes sense for the bigger orgs when you have like a multiple product lines. In our case, this is just one product. And while we have different use cases, this like a platform element is like quite thick, right? So you overlap a lot between each other. It's not something like you have like completely two different logins or like two different applications. It's the same experience. You might serve different use cases, but it's the same experience still. So I realized that if you build around the value, then you can attack the initiative which make sense for the company, for the business, which are strategic and high level as well. And you can basically react to the change in reality, change on the market, change in the customer base, and address this. And in our case, we're still like figuring out how to do this, and it's not going to be an easy transformation. So we're thinking about the value, how we can bring the value. And there are many different things in the value, right? So for the new customers, you're thinking about the funnel and how to make sure that they understand the product, they understand how to sign up on board, they know the value, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And for the existing customer, this is delight. How do you deliver on the promise you gave them? So if you're promising that your product solves the hassle with the sales documents, what does it mean? Is it like better? Is it faster? If it's faster, then focus on the critical path experience and like how to optimize this flow. But it's like touches all the points in the product. And in our case, we formed a team around the product funnel, and we started thinking about the product funnel and how the customers get to the value. And so there are different stages here. So awareness, when they know about product something, but they just don't connect like all the dots together. So we're trying to drive them, and we're trying to get them to the trial, but only trials which make sense for us, and we know that potentially they may use the product. And then consideration, when they consider it and we explain what the value, and then the decision phase when they commit and make a purchase, and then the value stage when they actually got to value, because if they bought, it does not mean that they got to value. They may not adopt the product. They maybe not fully understand the product, et cetera, and that's when the churn is happening, right? So we're trying to build this funnel and map this funnel to the sales org as well, and start like measuring those gates between each of the stages, just to understand how to drive this overall experience and how to improve this this new customer experience for them. And sort of like different stages and different metrics here. And my goal right now is to figure out how can we build the org where this like collaboration is happening between the teams to serve those new customers and existing customers' need, so we can focus on the most important things for the company at a particular moment, and we can rearrange and reorganize the whole thing and put efforts where it makes sense. In our case, it's looking like this. So as you can see, we introduced many senior roles here, VP product, VP engineering, to be able to scale the org. So we're at 90, so we're thinking about 300 right now. So all those roles are going to be important for us to scale. But the way how we think about this is, so we have just 2 flows, or maybe even 1 flow of all these incoming things. And the product management organization is working on making sure it's like worked out, we understand what we need to do, and it's prioritized based on the company needs and the company strategy. So they're constantly working on those backlogs and preparing this, like in the discovery phase, and preparing what we may potentially build in future, what makes sense. And the engineering org be able to invest efforts into what makes sense at this particular point and what's at the very top of this backlog, or whatever you call it, right? And as we speak, this is happening right now. And when I mean now, it means today. It's going to be interesting to see what it will bring to the company. So we've been through the 5 stages. He didn't mention any next stages. So we'll see what it's going to be. But I think why the product structure and the product evolution and the way how you work is important, because it's like your body, right? If you are healthy inside, you're going to be healthy outside as well. If you're not healthy inside, you may look like great, but at the end of the day, we are in the game, which is a long term. We've been working on this product like 6 years. It's a huge potential, tremendous market, and we have like very ambitious goals. So for us, as the product leaders and the executives, you need to build the org which will evolve around the needs of the company to solve them efficiently. Thank you very much.
Wow, thank you. Thank you so much. We have time for a question and answer session. Yeah, we have the first question here. And before we started asking questions, so one suggestion: if you're asking a question, it's always better to introduce yourself and say what you do, just to build a better conversation. And second thing, those who are late, guys, you missed the opportunity to win a free ticket that was under one of the chairs. And just FYI, there are no free tickets on the chairs, so it makes sense to kind of let everyone sit. Don't try to sit on 2 chairs or 3 chairs or whatever, because we have a lot of people standing on the back rows, and there are plenty of seats here. Thank you. So the first question, who do we have here?
Yep. Fire up.
Hey, I'm Oleg. I work as a product manager for US insurtech startup Matic. And thanks for the great speech. Our journey is pretty similar to yours, but we are way smaller. So my question is regarding the OKRs. We also implemented it, and I think it works greatly, but how do you align OKRs and roadmap? What's the dependencies? Are your roadmap are always driven by OKRs? And if there are any trade-offs between like the OKRs and the delivers from roadmap. For example, as a product manager, I understand that I have to sacrifice my short-term goals right now and build some core infrastructure to be able to achieve higher OKRs later on.
That's an awesome question.
Thank you.
Probably another speech. But So just like to give you the way how I think about this. So first of all, a couple things. So first of all, you need to have a full commit on the exec level that you're working on the OKRs, and it's going to be always trade-off. So that's not you are driving like something specifically. You need your execs to be able to commit that you need to do this like infrastructure change, but you need to understand why, right? So you need to tie this to the higher level objective. So in our case, I'll give you an example. In our case, we have the yearly OKR for the company, and we usually don't change them. And in our case, for 2020, it's going to be unlock-up market. Unlock-up market means like 1 trillion things. Like you can build this, you can build this, you can build this. But you need to understand that like fundamentally, we need to be able to scale. So we need to be able to move fast. We need to be able to address like some specific needs from the bigger customers. And if there is an agreement on a higher level, you can always tie your things to this like higher level OKRs. That's what usually we do. I can tell you off the bat, we don't work well with the roadmap, so we struggle with this. So we're trying to communicate this back to the sales, and we need to fix this process. It does not work well right now. But usually what we try to do, from the exec team, so we try to give as much data as possible for the product managers so they can figure out how they can achieve like higher level goals we have for the company. An example might be you can achieve your revenue goals by very different things, either growing new customers, improving retention, introducing new product line, growing bigger customers. And in order to make a decision, so you need to calculate. So we started this initiative of the strategic initiatives, right? So when the product manager can come up with the idea and do like some math on a napkin, like, oh, if we invest like one team in this area for 6 months, so we get something out of this. So it's just easier to speak their language when the business understands why. I don't know if it answers your questions, like it's very vague, but I'm happy to talk more about this.
Thank you. We have one more over there.
Hello, my name is Ruslan. I'm a product manager at tickets.ua. I'd like to get back to the second stage where you had managers, execution-driven managers. The third stage where you moved to a more of a product-oriented management. So have you met any resistance? And what happened to those execution-driven managers? Have you requalified them, or have you fired them? Could you please share that?
They disappeared. Yeah, it's a great question. It is very hard to change like a mentality of the people. So if they're not like product people, you can probably learn this, but it is hard. So my idea at that point was, okay, if they can focus on a delivery, and I have tons of ideas what to do, right? If they can focus on a delivery so they can execute. But the challenge with this approach so there is a team, and the team wants to understand why. And those type of managers, does not help to understand why. They just like, it's just purely execution. Oh, like sprints, this. So delivery. And in my opinion, in order to charge the team with the right energy, so they need to understand the problem and work on the problem together. And it only can happen if the product managers drive this and they go from the problem to the solution, not from the task to the solution, right? So in our case, we just parted ways with those people. There were a couple of people focusing on delivery. It just didn't work from the culture perspective. And actually after this, maybe before, but we wrote like a culture code, which serves as like some, I don't know, like a filter or like additional check, like who we work with. Yeah.
Perfect. We have time for at least one more question. Can we get a mic for someone?
Yeah, yep. I think I will be next. Hi, I'm Marina. Thanks for your speech. I am product manager in Rin, Ukraine. And my question is about the growth of the organization and the speed of the changes that you introduce in your product. Because if it's a small company, it's very easy to change something that you don't like. But if you already a big organization with this whole pyramid, if you want to change a small thing, then you realize that it goes through all the areas or all the units. You realize, okay, we need to revise the whole backlog because there are other priorities there. And the chances that you will get a small change are pretty, like in a couple of days are pretty low. Like you will have this small change in a month or 2 months or so. So my question is, how do you handle this speed of the introduction of changes in your product and the growth? So do you treat it as like inevitable evil and you have like projections for it, or?
Mm-hmm. That's a good question. That's a great question, actually. And so first of all, I don't think it's an evil. I think it's a reality. Everything is constantly changing. You don't know what's going to be like tomorrow, like on the market. Maybe you need to rework the whole product. And so when we started thinking about this, so we met this resistance, especially when we introduced those, we moved from the feature teams to units. They were like, oh my gosh, again, like it's constantly changing. And so what we did, we declared that it's a part of the culture. So you're in the environment and change is just a normal process, right? And it is hard, like I'm saying this like, oh, we introduce this as a culture. It is hard. It is hard to explain like developers that, well, maybe you'll need to refocus on this. Maybe you'll need to refocus on this, right? It's not easy. But it should be a part of the culture. So people should treat this as a normal process, not as an exception, which always like throws everything off, right? That's number one. Second, it depends on the change. So it depends where the change is and what you're changing. And then my approach is like, ideally, you want to delegate this to the level where the change should be. In fact, you need to probably delegate more so your people can grow and figure out this on their own. Because like introducing the change like this, like from the top to the bottom, it just does not work because you don't have a context of the problem. How can you judge like what they should do? I don't know. So, and the way how it works in our case, so even in those unit cases, so all the units leaders, it's like a tight team, so they work together, so they know all the problematics. Like if you want to change something in the process of the engineering, so they get together and they change, right? Same with the product manager. We want to introduce a new way to collect product feedback. Fantastic, we added this tool or this process. It's not going through the top to the bottom. I'm not even participating in this because basically people need to solve their problem and bring solutions instead of the problems to me. That's kind of how I think about this.
Okay, so just to be clear, having all your questions answered is one of the things we are really willing to do, but it's just not possible to do this within 10 minutes, 15 minutes time frame. That's why we're having a coffee breaks, more than an hour for lunch, and an after party. And Sergey is not leaving right now, so catch him, talk to him, ask him questions, and we have to move forward. So thank you so much for this talk. Thank you.
Thank you very much, guys.